Welcome to the Explainer. So today, we're jumping into a piece of writing that the author himself describes as, well, raunchy and tasteless. On the surface, it feels like this chaotic, super personal monologue that just doesn't make any sense. But what if that's the whole point? Let's break it down and see what's really going on here.
Okay, so right out of the gate, the author hits us with a confession. He says, "What I wrote, it made no sense." Now, this isn't him just admitting he's confused. No, this feels more like a mission statement. He's basically telling us, hey, the chaos, that is the point. And that one line really sets the stage for everything we're about to unpack.
So the piece kicks off by really taking a shot at those simple, clean stories we're always told about how life is supposed to work out. You know the ones. The narrator is basically questioning this huge assumption that if we just follow the rules, everything will make perfect sense. He's not buying it. And he does this by showing us this massive contrast between the world we're promised and, the world as it actually is. So on one hand, you've got this simple formula, right? Whiter teeth get you the girl. It's a super clean cause and effect kind of story. But then there's reality. A messy, completely unpredictable place where a guy like Rock Hudson, the picture-perfect leading man, has his entire legacy turned upside down by the AIDS crisis. That simple promise, it just shatters into a million pieces. Now, this feeling of chaos he's talking about, it isn't just some abstract idea. The narrator grounds it in two incredibly personal and very different experiences, living through the AIDS crisis and his own journey through Alcoholics Anonymous. He talks about this period with a term he made up himself, and it's deliberately provocative. He calls it AIDS trauma porn. Yeah, it's a shocking phrase, and it's meant to be. He's trying to capture the surreal horror of a time when death and sex became, as he puts it, inextricably interwoven. It wasn't just about tragedy anymore. It was like tragedy had become a spectacle, this constant public performance of pain and desire. And he paints this picture of his state of mind before he found a new path. And it's just this waterfall of conflicting feelings. He says he was sweet and stupid and hungry and angry and lonely and tired. It's just a perfect portrait of someone who is completely overwhelmed by the chaos, both on the inside and the outside. And then, completely flipping the script from all that chaos, he finds the rigid, almost shockingly simple structure of Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, think about it. For a mind that's just swimming in ambiguity and confusion, these four concrete promises, a new happiness, no regrets, serenity, and peace, that must have felt like an absolute lifeline. So this is the really crucial part. The title of this entire monologue, it actually comes from a review of his own attempt to make sense of his life. He wrote a musical play, and a critic for the Los Angeles Times said it expertly walked the line between tasteless and raunchy. And you know what? He doesn't run from that label. He completely embraces it. He sees it as the perfect description, not just for his art, but for his entire life experience. Okay, so once he's laid out all that personal history for us, the narrator turns his gaze outward. He starts using pop culture as this kind of mirror, projecting his own cynical and chaotic worldview onto public figures, and using their stories to try and make sense of his own. And man, he weaves together this dizzying mix of references. One minute we're talking about classic movie stars like Rock Hudson, the next it's art world icons like Madonna and Keith Haring, and then bam, modern political figures like Melania Trump and Billy Bush. It's like they all become characters in his personal drama, symbols of a world he sees as both totally absurd and deeply, deeply flawed. And this really gets to the heart of how he sees celebrity. He says, I think famous people are just like regular people. They're just a lot more microphones hanging around. The flaws, the messy behavior, that's not special to them. The only real difference is that their private moments become these huge public spectacles. You can kind of see the parallel to his own AIDS trauma porn, right? So he takes that exact same cynical, pop culture-soaked lens and turns it directly onto politics. And what comes out is this scattered, almost surreal stream of consciousness rant. It just seems to jump all over the place, randomly bouncing between different scandals and headlines. The thing is, the narrator throws all these political references at us like a chaotic jumble. But if we actually take a second and arrange them chronologically, a surprisingly clear picture starts to form. It kicks off with the Access Hollywood tape, then it moves to the January 6th riot, then to the Mar-a-Lago documents, and it wraps up with that Georgia phone call. When you put that order on it, you can really see the full scope of what he's critiquing. But the narrator doesn't just see chaos in politics, he sees something else. He sees a kind of high art.
He actually takes a political insult, calling an opponent a rhino, and compares it to a deep literary cut from the playwright Ionesco. He's basically suggesting that modern politics has gotten so surreal, so bizarre, that the only way to even begin to understand it is through the lens of absurdist theater. And his whole tone throughout this section is perfectly captured in this one sarcastic line. He says, "Pardon me, I'm sorry this hews so closely to the truth, or at least it's documented." He's being completely sarcastic, right? He's pointing out that these insane events are documented facts, but at the same time, he's making us question what truth and documentation even mean anymore in a world that's gotten this strange.
So we get to the climax of the piece, and it turns out it's not really about politics or pop culture at all. It's about the act of storytelling itself. In this final section, the narrator basically turns the camera around and points it right at his own face. And then he just drops this bombshell, this explicit confession. After this entire time spent blurring the lines between fact, memory, and his cynical take on everything, he comes right out and says it, "I give not one shit about what is true." I mean, that is the calling card, the absolute definition of an unreliable narrator. And that leads to the core question he just leaves hanging in the air for us. He asks us directly, am I always sarcastic? Like, can you trust for a moment anything I say? This forces us to go back and rethink everything he's just told us. Was any of that pain real? Was that cynicism genuine? Or was the whole thing just a performance, an expert exercise in walking that very fine line between raunchy and tasteless? He even breaks the fourth wall and warns us about his own story. He says, the end of this thing, it's really abrupt. He's telling us flat out that there's not going to be a neat conclusion, no simple answer to tie it all up. The very structure of the writing is designed to mirror the chaos of its content. It's brilliant. So when all is said and done, we're left with this one big question. Is this rambling, chaotic, totally raunchy and tasteless style a flaw in the writing? Or is it actually a deliberate strategy for survival? Maybe, just maybe, in a world that so often makes absolutely no sense, the only honest way to capture it is to create something that makes no sense either. And in that process, maybe you stumble upon a much deeper kind of truth.
It's New Year's, and it's been one of those kind of rough days when I would have tried to write poetry and discovered that nothing made any sense, or I knew that already. But when I tried to make sense of it in poetry, it wasn't that I couldn't. What I wrote, it made no sense. It was kind of like this, honestly. But I hadn't embraced it yet, because that would be a very big letdown. All your life you've been told that it makes sense that if your teeth are whiter, you'll more likely get the girl and still get to keep the boy, the boys, all of them, all the boys. If you have whiter teeth, you'll get to keep all the boys, along with that one girl who you'll marry. And then you'll have kids and really like Rock Hudson movies, but because of the ladies. That handsome guy, it made sense he got all the ladies, and then that scandalous thing happened to Rock, and he made that really bad choice to be open about it. Ruined his whole legacy. He could have been Ronald Reagan. I mean, if he'd lived longer than Reagan held out on saying the word AIDS as president.